Zombies sure are popular these days.
One more time.
With the success of franchises like The Walking Dead and films like 28 Days Later, Shaun of the Dead, and Zombieland, it's fair to say that zombies are something of a cultural obsession for us at the moment. And why not? They are the ultimate monster for the modern age, once human but now mindless animals, strong only in groups, making them a threat in urban areas when so many of us live in big cities. The zombie represents the loss of humanity more than perhaps any other monster out there. It can't be reasoned with, it can't be stopped, it only wants to eat you. So where did zombies come from? Well, as surprising as it may seem, they weren't always infectious cannibals. Zombies, in fact, have gone through a rather bizarre evolution over the last century, spending most of their time merely as walking corpses before suddenly being transformed into the ultimate plague. While the idea of undeath is common to many cultures, the traditional zombie originated in Africa, in the form of various undead entities from a number of distinct yet similar animistic religions. The word zombie actually derives from a Creole word, zombie, which in turn is derived from Nzambi, I don't know how to pronounce that. But it was the name of a West African spiritual deity. With the slave trade, many Africans were brought to the New World and forced to abandon their roots and convert to Christianity. Naturally, many objected to this, and held on to their ancestral beliefs. Over time, as many of these were either lost or integrated together, the religion of voodoo appeared in its modern, recognizable form. Voodoo was historically most popular in Haiti, and it is on Haiti that the creature that we came to recognize as the zombie originated. While zombies had existed in voodoo and voodoo-like religions before this, in Haitian culture it found a new meaning as a symbol of cultural fear. You see, Haiti as a nation was founded as the result of a slave rebellion. In fact, I think it may be the only successful slave revolt in history. In Haitian voodoo, zombies were corpses that were resurrected through special herbal compounds and rituals performed by witch doctors, or bokers as they were known in actual voodoo lore. These corpses were bound to the will of the boker and had to serve him throughout all their unlife. In short, zombies were the ultimate slaves. Even after death, they were forced into labor. It really shouldn't take a sociologist to figure out how this myth represented the fears of the Haitian culture. They were a nation of freed slaves, and their greatest monster represented the system that had bound them until very recently. Then the United States got a hold of the myth, and it wasn't long before it was mixed with some good old-fashioned xenophobia and racism. Two things that, and I don't mean to brag, we are quite good at. To the American public in the early 20th century, voodoo represented a dark and unknown pagan religion, practiced by strange foreigners. Early horror films exaggerated the darker aspects of the religion and used it as a sort of general religion of evil. Horror tropes such as the voodoo doll and the evil witch doctor in a hut in the swamp were born from this era, and zombies began to make their first appearances in American cinema, as the horrific monsters who served the witch doctors as they terrified the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant protagonists. Perhaps the most well-remembered of these films was White Zombie, a 1932 film starring Bela Lugosi, who was not playing Dracula for once. The first use of a zombie apocalypse type of scenario in fiction, however, did not come from this voodoo monster. Instead, the original zombie apocalypse story, the grandfather of the genre, if you will, was Richard Matheson's 1954 novel I Am Legend, a book which has been adapted to the screen 3 times, with The Last Man on Earth starring Vincent Price, The Omega Man starring Charlton Heston, and I Am Legend starring Will Smith. I Am Legend, to this day, is considered one of the greatest vampire stories ever written. That's right, I said vampire. Remember, zombies were not infectious beings when this was written. Vampires, however, were. So Matheson simply took a simple premise and wrote his book around it. What if the whole world were infected by vampires? Many now common zombie tropes appear in this novel. The lone survivor barricading himself in a building to protect himself from the hordes. The tragic backstory in which the survivor must kill his infected loved ones. Even the heart-wrenching death of the dog is used in Matheson's story. It is no surprise, then, that I Am Legend served as inspiration for the true father of the zombie apocalypse genre, George Romero. In the wake of the Vietnam War, the American public had lost its innocence. We no longer needed monsters to terrify us, for what better monster could there be but man? It was the 1968 film Night of the Living Dead, directed by George Romero, that capitalized on this loss of innocence and created the zombie apocalypse genre. Night of the Living Dead was a revolutionary horror film. Prior to its release, horror movies had devolved into children's films. They were cheesy and goofy and harmless, and little kids loved to go see them and squeal with joy and laughter. As a result, there were quite a few traumatized children in theaters when Romero's film came out. The film brought horror back. It showed scenes of graphic violence and gore, and it created a scenario where even friends and family couldn't truly be relied upon, because you never know when one will be infected and try to eat you. When someone became one of the undead, they lost all sense of moral responsibility. In the werewolf episode, I talked about the loss of humanity. This is a common theme in monsters, and the zombie represents this better than perhaps any other creature. There is no moral redemption. There is no human-level intelligence. Zombies are purely instinctual creatures, operating solely on animalistic drives. Werewolves and vampires retain some of their humanity. Zombies retain none of it. Oh, but they weren't called zombies originally. Romero's original plan was to call his monsters ghouls, and indeed they have more in common with the mythological ghoul, a deformed flesh-eating creature, than they do with the traditional zombie. However, the press and public were unaware of Romero's intentions, and, needing a name for these monsters, they simply reasoned that since they were reanimated corpses, they might as well be called zombies. The name stuck, and as a result, zombies were reborn in the public consciousness not as dangerous foreign boogeymen, but rather as infectious cannibalistic abominations. We could sit here all day talking about the symbolism of Night of the Living Dead itself, since the film is so open to symbolic interpretation. It's practically a film scholar's wet dream. I've already mentioned the connection to Vietnam, but I've also seen the film referenced as a critique of consumerism, with the zombies representing the public, mindlessly consuming the products marketed at them without a thought or care in the world. The film also, ironically enough considering the xenophobia the zombie represented before its debut, has some parallels to the civil rights movement. The protagonist of the film was played by Dwayne Jones, an African-American actor. His character is a resourceful, heroic man who leads the survivors of the apocalypse. In the end of the film, he is killed by a redneck militia. Given the time period, it's easy to see the movie as a defense of civil rights, though to this day Romero denies that this was the intention. According to George Romero, Dwayne Jones was cast simply because he gave the best audition, and Romero didn't even realize the implications of casting a black man until after the film's release. Most scholars are eager to call bull on that, though, since it's kind of hard to see how someone could have cast a person of color for the lead role in the 1960s and not realize the social implications. John Russo, Romero's co-writer on Night of the Living Dead, is responsible for some of the goofier zombie tropes. His later works introduced the idea of zombies craving brains. Later, Dan O'Bannon's film Return of the Living Dead in 1985 took the brain craving to its logical conclusion, creating an apocalypse of intelligent zombies who need to eat human brains in order to ease the pain of their death. As the decades went on, zombies became goofier and goofier. While some works, such as the Resident Evil video games, remained faithful to the flesh-eating Romero zombies, most examples of zombies throughout the later part of the 20th century shuffled around moaning brains a lot. Then, in the first decade of the 21st century, everything changed. The film 28 Days Later introduced a new take on the zombie plague. These zombies were the result of a mutated strain of rabies. They weren't dead, they were merely aggressive and highly contagious. Zack Snyder's remake of Dawn of the Dead, which had originally been the sequel to Romero's original film, similarly used fast zombies, though the ones from Dawn were still undead. With these films, fast zombies became more and more popular, though works such as The Walking Dead and the parody film Shaun of the Dead have kept the shuffling, slow-moving zombie archetype alive.
Zombies are now one of the most popular monsters of modern mythology. If you ever want to have a discussion about zombies, now's probably the easiest time to do it, because pretty much any random person is probably a zombie fan. I don't know when the zombie bubble will burst, or when they'll be replaced by a new fad, but right now, the zombie apocalypse is going strong, and we might as well enjoy it.
Hey Tom, it's Bob from the office down the hall. It's good to see you, buddy. How have you been? Things have been okay for me, except that I'm a zombie now. I really wish you'd let us in. I think I speak for all of us when I say I understand why you folks might hesitate to submit to our demand. But here's an FYI, you're all gonna die screaming, all we wanna do is eat your brains. We're not unreasonable, I mean no one's gonna eat your eyes.